Story 1. If he cared about violence in the city, he would not have approved a $1 billion cut to our budget. The only thing he cares about is control. Story 2. Native here. He must have a lot of pages in the Epstein files to be making this much noise. Every time that despicable person opens his mouth, I want to scream, especially when he involves my city. Story 3. Your question is flawed because it does not address violence, which is at a 30-year low. Sending in federal troops to perform law enforcement is explicitly illegal for the president. Story 4. I assume massive immigration and customs enforcement raids are forthcoming, or it is all just a distraction from Epstein. I am curious how our soon-to-be former mayor will spin it into a positive. Story 5. My take is that it is not to address violence but to deal with the homeless population, which is disturbing. My understanding is that he plans to federalize the Metropolitan Police Department as well. The removal of the homeless population has become more drastic in the past few months. Story 6. No one wants it. Washington, DC has problems, but they are normal for a city. Crime is at a 30-year low. They are just testing out fascism. Also, former President Donald Trump does not like the city because the city actively does not like him. He is a petty man who enjoys making people suffer if he feels they did not compliment the size of his hands enough. Story 7. Federal troops going to hot zones is not new, but this is not a hot zone. There are no riots in the streets. Violence in Washington, D.C. is at a 30-year low. This is just federal agents arresting homeless people for being homeless. I feel obligated to mention that homelessness is a macro problem with micro solutions. Soup kitchens are not going to solve homelessness. We would be far better off reforming our healthcare industry if that is our real goal, as the majority of homeless people are so because of medical debt. That does not mean that soup kitchens are wrong, just that their goal is different from solving homelessness. Arresting homeless people also does not solve homelessness. It costs $150,000 per year to jail someone. It would be cheaper to provide every homeless person with housing than to arrest all homeless people, moral arguments aside. Story 8. Donald Trump is attempting to distract people from Jeffrey Epstein and is testing how much further he can go without being stopped. Story 9. I think he believes his ratings are in the trash and the American people are angry. To create a buffer, he is bringing in the National Guard and taking control. He might be preparing for what is to come if the list gets released, although that is unlikely because he is on it. Story 10. They are out patrolling the safest, whitest, richest neighborhoods in Washington, District of Columbia. The Wharf, DuPont Circle, Navy Yard, all the most gentrified places in the city. $1,000 says they never go east of the river. It is a joke and a distraction from the Epstein list. Story 11. Washington, District of Columbia, is not even in the top 10 American cities for crime. The worst cities are all in conservative states. This appears to be former President Donald Trump preparing to declare martial law if it seems things will go badly for him. Donald Trump will gladly destroy the entire country to avoid justice. Story 12. I have run a community cleanup organization in the district since 2021. Every month, we hold a cleanup in a different location within the district. We move from neighborhood to neighborhood and cover all areas. I believe I have spent more time in every challenging part of Washington, D.C. than anyone involved in making these decisions. I started my organization after an impromptu cleanup of the National Mall area in front of the Capitol building on January 9, 2021, in response to events that occurred 3 days earlier. It was not a political act. I was simply tired of the city being littered by people who use it as a stage for their nonsense. Since then, we have held dozens of cleanups with thousands of volunteers. We understand what it looks like when trash accumulates in the city. As always, we will be here when it is time to take out the trash. You can count on it. Story 13. Washington, D.C. did not make the top 20 for America's most dangerous cities in 2025. He has another reason for doing this. Story 14. Hundreds of thousands of people in and around Washington, District of Columbia, work for the federal government or related industries. Anytime former President Donald Trump sets his sights on Washington, District of Columbia, it causes significant anxiety for many residents. His Administration has fired thousands of employees. He appointed himself board chair of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. He has taken control of the police and called in the National Guard. Honestly, he treats the city as his plaything. It is trauma after trauma for many people. That said, there are important actions that elected officials should take regarding homelessness and crime. I do not have much faith in Mayor Muriel Bowser, her approach to crime, her stance on returning to office, or how she has aligned herself with former President Donald Trump on several occasions. Story 15. If he does not encounter massive resistance, he will continue to do it in other cities. It would be effective if Washington, D.C. residents could take pictures of the so-called war zone and share them widely on social media. Story 16. It is all for show, frankly. There is crime in Washington, D.C., and many offenders are young people. However, this issue is not addressed here, nor will this solution solve it. Children need education, mentors, jobs, and a sense of purpose. This is a broader societal issue. Story 17. I thought the rationale was that Washington, D.C. needed to clear out the homeless. I do not know where they are supposed to go, Los Angeles, El Salvador, or death camps. How about using some money for mental health care? No. Story 18, too soon to say. I'm out around town this evening, and it is oddly quiet with fewer police than usual. Only local officers were protecting a small anti-Trump protest. Maybe calm before the storm? I am used to seeing officers all over since I live in Navy Yard, where many members of Congress reside. Summer 2020 seemed much more severe with military vehicles. On Pennsylvania Avenue, it is insulting altogether, given that former President Trump refused to address the events of January 6th. I witnessed it, and it was truly astonishing. Most people do not realize that Trump did not take action. The military intervened under Vice President Pence's orders. If it were not for Pence, things would have been far worse that day. Story 19. If he were more competent, I would say he is organizing forces in Washington, D.C., to prevent riots expected in the coming weeks or pushing boundaries to start attacking Democratic cities. Instead, I believe he is still trying to distract us from the Epstein files. Either way, I am not happy. Story 20. He or they are just testing the waters to see how people are going to react because they are probably going to do it all over the country in Democratic cities to remove Democratic leadership and place the Republican Party in power everywhere. Story 21. It is unwise. So far, they are patrolling the safest places like the Wharf and Union Station. There is crime in Washington, D.C., but not there. Let us see these individuals contribute where they are needed. Story 22. I'm in Baltimore City, a future goal of his it seems, but I'm in Washington, District of Columbia 2 to 3 times a week for work and have several friends who live there. So I'm there for fun a lot as well. It's nonsense. Washington, District of Columbia is no utopia, but it's not what former President Donald Trump is making it out to be by any means. I felt fine walking the streets. I'll feel a bit more uncomfortable about going there now that it's militarized than I did before. I lean more conservative on some issues, including crime, but this is too much and part of a bigger plan. Story 23. What violence? They did the same thing with San Francisco in his last administration, causing anyone who watched Fox News to think that those cities were engulfed in street crime. Absolutely, there are bad parts and issues, but they are big cities. Washington, D.C. is a very nice city. Story 24. What is in the Epstein files? What is Maxwell doing in a low-security prison in Texas? What is going on with him inserting himself into the cryptocurrency ecosystem? Story 25. Epstein file distraction. He will do anything to take attention away from the proof that he harms middle school girls. Story 26. As I have been saying since November 5th, a second Trump administration is precisely what our Second Amendment rights were written into the Constitution for. Story 27. Not a native, but I was just in Washington, D.C. for a week and stayed out until 3 a.m. walking the streets and felt very safe. I do not know what the president is talking about. Story 28. Over 10 years resident of Logan Circle. It is a joke. Yes, crime is bad, especially among the 13 to 18 age range. Something has to change. I do not know what would work there, but it is not nearly as bad as this administration is saying. It will be like Los Angeles. They will arrest a couple of people. Did you all see that video of a man on U Street Northwest throwing a Subway sandwich at a Federal Bureau of Investigation and Department of Homeland Security officer? They walked after him. The man was running away in shorts and Sperry shoes. Laugh out loud. So dumb. All of this. I drove around Washington, DC today in the afternoon and did not see a single extra officer around. Story 29. I lived in Washington, D.C., at arguably the height of crime before President Barack Obama's years. The President of the United States is lying about the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. I lived in an area where people knew others who were shot at or stabbed. But it is not the horrible crime city everyone makes it out to be. The people involved in crime are most likely acting out of survival. If you look at the population on the streets, it is disproportionately people of color and absolutely orchestrated by corrupt white men posing as religious zealots. It is not about crime or cleaning up the streets. It is about racism and distraction for this administration. If they are so intent on getting rid of criminals, maybe they should start with the one in the White House. He is wealthy, white, and a con man hiding in plain sight. Story 30. He is building a citadel protected by people loyal to him because he gave them a $50,000 bonus. This will work because if you want people to be loyal to you, improve their lives and their material conditions. Story 31. He is using the Epstein files as a distraction now for his authoritarian takeover of America. We need to fight both battles. Story 32. It's almost like he is using this big non-issue, according to current statistics, to cover up some other more pertinent issue that might incriminate him and cause an outcry for him to step down. Almost, perhaps, maybe. Story 33. He is a fascist. Period. Crime is actually down in Washington, D.C., but he has never let truth or facts stop him. His supporters only get their information from pro-fascism sources. That it is a distraction from the Epstein list is a bonus for him. Make no mistake, everything unfolding has always been the plan. It is a dystopian nightmare, and the Democrats are not fighting fire with fire, including the actor from California auditioning to be president. Story 34. Crime is at a 30-year low according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation director, appointed by Donald Trump. The entire situation is a distraction from Jeffrey Epstein. Do not let the issue be forgotten. Story 35. Yes, there are parts of the city where crime is a significant issue, including my neighborhood. However, this is clearly a distraction from the Epstein files. Story 36. Honestly, I do not care. I am much more concerned with survival. Doritos are $7 a bag now. We have bigger problems. Story 37. I want him to go away. He hardly spends any time here anyway. Capitol Hill feels dirtier when he is here. Story 38. Why is no one talking about how this is a setup for another coup? The last time, the way the police, security guards, and military control was arranged made stopping the coup take much longer. The next time, after losing the election, the coup supporters will have more control. All the talk about Jeffrey Epstein files is a distraction from the main issue. Epstein is important, but nothing will happen there unless someone credibly leaks them, like in the Watergate scandal. Maybe someone in the services can explain the District of Columbia control and coup angle better. Story 39. Nazi actions for Nazi supporters. If there were any questions about this being a fascist regime, this should answer them. Story 40. I used to live in Washington, D.C. for years and am so glad I do not anymore. The National Guard is not something I personally consider appropriate to be used as local law enforcement. A lot of what is happening in the country scares me now, and I am glad I currently reside in a remote area. Story 41. Washington, D.C. needs a garbage worker strike of federal buildings, especially the White House and Capitol. Transit workers and teachers should join. Bring everything to a halt. Story 42. Ohio, Louisiana, and Missouri each have 3 cities in U.S. News and World Report's top 25 most dangerous cities list. Washington, D.C. is not on that list. However, I believe there is a hidden reason he is not sending the military into those 3 problematic states. Story 43. As someone who grew up in Washington, District of Columbia in the 1980s, it is safer than it has been since that time. Yes, there are some sketchy people and you may encounter some more aggressive homeless individuals, but that is the extent of it. I have felt far less secure in cities like New York City, Nashville, Richmond, Baltimore, Atlanta, and Seattle. Washington, District of Columbia, is a great city right now with some flaws, but I would be hesitant to consider it unsafe. Story 44. My view is that I am witnessing the rise of extremist ideology in America. I am observing the beginning of the destruction of America, weakening it by the potential loss of hundreds of thousands of Americans, leaving it vulnerable to attacks from our enemies. Also, the billionaire class can steal more money from the lower classes. Story 45. I have been here for 4 years now. I am upset and shocked, but not surprised that the president took this step. As others have said, he cut the budget to the city by $1 billion and reduced the Federal Emergency Management Agency budget by 44%. Why would you cut the budget of the Federal Emergency Management Agency almost in half if crime is an issue? It is because he is an authoritarian who wants to strip away all of our rights. Washington, D.C. is the easiest city for him to do this in because the federal government can exert more control over the city than others. It is a test run. He will come after other cities too. Mark my words, when Eric Adams wins the election for mayor of New York City, the president will pull something similar there. On another note, crime is decreasing in the district. There are many statistics published by the Department of Justice and our local police department that confirm this. It feels much safer to walk around here than it did 2 to 3 years ago. People are claiming it is safer in Washington, D.C. now than it has been in 30 years. That said, regardless of whether crime is going up, down, or sideways, we should not allow the military to patrol our streets in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, or anywhere in this country. Story 46. It is only because big balls and other Make America Great Again operations are being targeted and assaulted daily, which they should be, to be fair. Story 47. He has poor problem-solving skills. He creates more problems than he solves. I am very tired of him. Story 48. Did you know that a criminal conviction requires a unanimous verdict? So, if you were on the jury in a case of direct action or disobedience against Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the administration, or similar, you could decide that the prosecutor did not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. This would result in a hung jury, leading to no conviction and forcing the state to try the case again. If there were a tacit agreement to this effect, what would the state do, given that it would be unable to successfully prosecute these cases? Who would want to be an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent under such conditions? Weaponized jury nullification. Story 49. This is still available as of August 11th. As we all knew before, it is just lies throughout. Story 50. Be on the lookout for a 34-time convicted felon violating the Constitution in Washington, District of Columbia. Other than that, you should be okay. Story 51. Washington, D.C. has always been a federal city, to be honest. They are just using the National Guard for policing. If your job is being a criminal, you were not supposed to get caught anyway. Maybe it will be a little tougher now. I do not know. Criminals will just adjust and keep moving. Story 52. There is a homeless problem in Washington, District of Columbia. There used to be, and maybe still is, a lot of people who literally set up camp around Rock Creek in Georgetown. I remember driving by and thinking, why is there a yard sale there? It was just a homeless person who had basically spread everything out right next to the walking path. It was one of the craziest things I have seen. Look, I cannot stand Donald Trump and think he is a menace to democracy. But there is a problem. Will bringing in the United States National Guard or federalizing the police help anything? Not likely. Story 53. Washington, D.C., resident of more than 5 years here. Violent crime is at a 30-year low, and Washington, D.C. is not even in the top 25 most dangerous cities in the United States. Getting those facts out of the way, this whole thing is a farce like the rest of his presidency, mainly to retaliate against those who criticize him and b. try to distract from the fact that he is a child rapist whose name is frequently mentioned in the Epstein files. Story 54. Great photo opportunity, but they are not going to enter areas with violent crime. We would not want any soldiers to become failures in this administration. Epstein list now. Story 55. Calling everything a distraction is a way to dismiss all the nonsense he is doing. They will install gas chambers in the concentration camp. It is all a distraction. He instigates the American public to declare martial law and suspend elections. Everyone says it is a distraction. At some point, people will acknowledge that it is both. It is too late for the United States. The people who truly care are the ones in the red hats. They have a belief system and they are all committed. Story 56. Google or use ChatGPT to answer the following question. What are the 20 U.S. cities with the most violent crime? Washington, D.C. is not on the resulting list. Memphis, New Orleans, and Baltimore are. I have personal experience with those three cities. The Washington, D.C. area is nowhere near that level. Donald Trump is playing public relations games again to see what he can get away with. After the midterm elections, the situation will be worse, and so will his successor. Story 57. He is going to try to chase anyone in Southeast who has darker skin than mayonnaise. Then he and his friends will build on the land. Story 58. It is a flawed plan that will not yield better results than doing nothing. He thinks force solves problems, but it is just a temporary band-aid for distraction. Story 59. Normalize calling him Donald. Familiarize yourself with the 1980s Darryl Strawberry chant, but replace the name with Donald. Story 60. Antagonistic behavior and political grandstanding. He called in the troops to protect the Epstein files. He knows it will not solve the problem he claims to solve, but he wants there to be violence and hopes this will provoke it so he can justify his actions and continue to expand to further cities. He mentioned New York City, Chicago, and others. From what I heard, they were concentrated in one part of the city today, but they will likely sweep through the rest of it in the coming weeks. Story 61. These are test cases for the midterms. Take over blue cities and declare martial law on election day to prevent cheating. Story 62. Californian here. I don't care for Donald Trump, but in my opinion, if he wanted to test his theory on crime and help anyone doing it in a state, that state being technically government-made and owned, Washington, District of Columbia, is the perfect place to use as a guinea pig. Have fun, suckers. Haha. I have to deal with a larger criminal dictator now. You get to see how it feels. By Felicia. Story 63. There is nothing less accurate than police statistics. Crime is not at a 30-year low in Washington, D.C. However, Donald Trump has zero credibility. He lashes out like a 3-year-old. He just wants ratings. Story 64. Sorry, we cannot allow the use of people as slaves anymore. Can I show you someone in need of help instead? Story 65. The Washington DC Reddit had to permanently ban posts about crime a year or two ago. When that happened, another Washington DC subreddit was created because crime was such a huge problem and people needed a place to talk about it. I know multiple people who have been shot in the last 2 years during carjackings in Washington, D.C. I personally drive in Washington, D.C. multiple times a week and am genuinely scared of being carjacked. This is a real problem. A quick search will show that crime in Washington, D.C. is a massive problem, and any crime statistics saying otherwise are incorrect. It is notable that many Washington, D.C. liberals and others criticized Mayor Bowser for how poorly she has handled crime until recently. The Washington, D.C. Police Union has released a statement reflecting this concern. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.